I don't sing, but I do remember melodies and remember words and find that certain phrases and songs just come back to me like this beautiful mantra, and I can hear that line, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well, as just this beautiful gift of centering and calming and putting me in the right frame of mind. Do you ever need something to put you in the right frame of mind? No? Well, then I guess you're just eavesdropping today on a conversation I'm going to be having with myself. And as I said a few moments ago, I'm working in part with a book written by Arthur Brooks and Oprah Winfrey, based on some of her interviews with him and some of his work. He is a professor at Harvard, and he created a class on happiness that was oversubscribed. Think about that for a moment. A class on happiness. I mean, to be able to attend a university like Harvard and then be offered a class on happiness, I think is a huge gift and actually a sign, I think, of our times. I think that we are living in times where the kinds of ideas and practices that we in Unity and New Thought have held onto for almost 150 years are now being mainstreamed and researched and studied in university, in hospitals, in higher education. And to me, that's really encouraging. It validates the kinds of things that we have accepted and practiced on the spiritual path. And I think it opens it up in a more mainstream way and makes it more accessible to more people. And so we're going to be looking at the idea this morning from a couple of the opening chapters of the book that happiness is not the goal. That might be kind of a radical thought, that happiness itself is not the goal. I liked Brooks' personal mission statement. He shares it early on. I listen to most of my books now. I listen to most of my books on Audible. And he said that his personal mission statement is this: to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of love and happiness using science and ideas. And I thought, boy, that's kind of like what we try to do together here at the Unity Center. I really do try to lift us up and bring us together, whether in person or bring us together virtually. And so this idea of lifting ourselves up, lifting one another up, and coming together, I think is a piece of how we build a better life for ourselves. He suggests in the book that there have been any number of studies pointing to the change in the way that Americans look at this idea of happiness and how they identify and describe their own state of happiness. He said that Americans today who are saying that they are not too happy has increased from 10% to 24%. That's a pretty big jump, only in the last decade. That the number of young people, and this is concerning to me as a mom and as a spiritual teacher and a conscious being, the number of young adults suffering from depression, clinical depression, is increasing. And that the number of people that are saying that they are very happy has fallen from 36% to 19%. So those trends, whether those numbers are exact or not, I think the trends are probably pretty accurate. And I think that it suggests that there is a need for the very kinds of things that we practice in Unity and the very kinds of ways that we come together. In Unity, we talk so much about, and we attempt to really model, this idea of safety, this idea of inclusivity, this idea of non-judgment, this idea of recognizing the sacred worth of every individual. And if we've been in a community such as ours for any length of time, it's almost easy to take that for granted. But the truth of the matter is it's not yet the most common way of people coming together. And I think that suggests to us that we have a place that we can fill to try to reverse some of those trends. He suggests that there are a lot of theories about what has caused this increase in depression and the decrease in how people are identifying and describing their own state of happiness. He says that some have pointed to the political division in our country, the economic state in our country. He made the point of saying that these trends happened before the pandemic. Before the pandemic. So how do we work with this, and how do we model for ourselves and for others a different way of being? Learning how to manage our life in new ways is not about willpower, but about applied knowledge. Learning how to manage our life in new ways is not about willpower, but about applied knowledge. Have any of you ever used willpower to try to bring about a change in your life? I know that for me, for years and years, before really getting deeply involved in Unity, I thought that was the thing I was supposed to do. That, like at the end of the year when I would set New Year's resolutions, right? And for me, then it was New Year's resolutions, not so much intentions and directions, but resolutions. And it was, I will make this happen. Anybody else like that? Right? That's exhausting, isn't it? Right? Because it's this kind of fierce control, this driving energy. Well, Brooks is suggesting that it's not about willpower, but about applied knowledge. And that suggests that, okay, we have to be willing to apply the knowledge, but we have to have some sense of what that knowledge is as a starting point, right? As the starting, what is it that we are going to apply so that we can move into a different way of being and build a better life for ourselves? Unity, you may or may not know this, Unity has emphasized spiritual knowledge and practice from the get-go. From the get-go. Unity's always seen itself as more of an educational concept and movement than than anything religious. And I don't think I'm running late yet, I'm actually early, than anything religious. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder of Unity, Unity was founded in the late 1800s. This is how he defined unity. And take it in for a moment. I think it's profound to me. Charles defined unity this way. Unity is a link, not the link. Unity is a link in the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus Christ. Take that just for a moment. He's identifying Jesus as a teacher, not a savior, but as a teacher. Unity is a link in the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus Christ. Our objective is to discern the truth in Christianity and prove it. It's not to convert anybody. It's not to make anybody feel guilty. It's to discern the truth with a capital T and prove it. And I'd say that the way that we prove it is by putting it into application, taking the ideas, the knowledge that we learn or the knowledge that is offered to us and applying it. And even being okay with the fact that when we first learn new knowledge about new ways of thinking and new ways of living and new ways of being, that there may be a part of us that resists it or that argues with it or that says, I'm not so sure I believe that. Has that ever happened to you? That's okay. And nobody in Unity, certainly not me, would ever say, just take things because I or some other teacher says this is the way it is. Instead, take it, and if any part of it makes some sense to you, take it and then test it. Test it in your own life and see if in testing it in your own life, you don't find that your life gets better. That's how we know that it is true for us. Does that make sense? That's applied knowledge. That's practice. So he suggests, Arthur Brooks suggests in the book and in the interviews, that happiness is not the goal. And he suggests, well, what is it that we mean when we say we want to be happy? I just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. What am I really saying? I'm saying that I want to achieve and keep certain positive emotions, certain positive feelings, and I want to not experience certain other feelings, right? But there seems to be something keeping me from doing that. There seems to be something keeping me from doing that. He suggests that there are two myths about happiness. And I found myself initially arguing when I first heard this line. I thought, I'm not so sure I agree with that. And then as he unpacked it a bit more, I thought, I think he's onto something here. He says there are two myths about happiness. Number one, that we can be happy. That's where I shut down a bit. I thought, what do you mean he's telling me I can't be happy? He says that's myth number one, that we can be happy. And myth number two, that our circumstances are keeping us stuck in unhappiness. Now that one I can accept, because I really believe that we always have the power to choose what we think, to choose our reaction, to choose our response. We can't determine and choose everything that happens to us or control everything that happens to us. But we always, whether we exercise it or not, can choose how we're going to interpret it, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to talk about it, how it's going to live in us, what it's going to cause us to do or not do. So he says the two myths about happiness, that we can be happy and that our circumstances are keeping us stuck. And then he went on to say this about why you can't be happy. You can't be happy, though you can be happier. You can't be happy, but you can be happier. That's because happiness is not a destination, but a direction. I found that to be really powerful, that happiness is not a destination. We've heard happiness is the journey, but this was more powerful to me because happiness is not a destination, it's the journey. It's a direction. It's a direction. And stay with that for a moment. When we're in a situation in which we don't feel happy because certain things are happening, what he's saying is, and I think he's right, even in that situation, there are things we can do to move in the direction of happiness, that we can be happier. Does that not sound much more achievable? That sounds incredibly achievable for me. It means that there is some progress I can make in how I am feeling inside. One of the problems we have is that we struggle with defining happiness. A lot of times, we tend to define things in terms of what it's not, and that is only partially helpful. To be able to define what it is important. He noticed that in Western cultures, we usually define happiness in terms of excitement and achievement. Would you say that that's probably pretty correct, I think, that we tend to define happiness in terms of excitement and achievement. And in more Eastern-oriented cultures, they tend to define happiness in terms of calm and contentment. Very different feeling and texture to those things, right? Very different feeling and texture to those things. Contentment, I think, is a beautiful feeling and a more achievable feeling and a longer lasting feeling. He goes on to suggest that we can define happiness in terms of three components. And I think the components he suggests are good ones, and I think they're helpful to us because we can almost use them as a bit of a barometer to kind of evaluating ourselves or noticing when we are feeling happier or when we are feeling less happy, to kind of look at these three components and ask ourselves, which of them are in place, or which of them are missing. And he suggests that the three components are these: enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. Enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. He says that enjoyment is not the same thing as feeling good. And enjoyment is not the same thing as pleasure. That feeling good and pleasure are a little more base sensations, physical sensations. He writes, pleasure is animal, enjoyment is completely human. Pleasure emanates from parts of the brain dedicated to rewarding us for certain activities like eating and sex that in earlier times would keep us alive and passing on our genes. Enjoyment, though, enjoyment takes an urge for pleasure and adds two important things: communion and consciousness. Think about that for a moment. Think about when you have really enjoyed an experience. You will probably be able to identify that there was pleasure and communion and consciousness. Think about Thanksgiving for a moment. Thanksgiving for many of us is about a wonderful, delicious meal, right? And that wonderful, delicious meal can be taken and eaten all by ourselves and certainly bring about a certain amount of pleasure. Our tummies are full, and and what do they say about turkey? It puts you to sleep from whatever protein or whatever it is in there that makes us feel kind of satiated and tired. And so there's a certain pleasure that we feel from that. But he says, now imagine that same delicious meal with beautiful music, with your family or best friends, and really experiencing that together, very conscious of what is going on, and experience that in communion. That is a way of looking at this quality of enjoyment, that it is not just a feeling, not just pleasure, but there's some sort of connection, there's some sort of communion with it. So he says that there are these three elements of happiness: enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. And the satisfaction one, I think, is a really key one. When do you often feel satisfied? When do you feel a sense of personal satisfaction? Think about it for yourself for a moment. When was the last time you had a real sense of satisfaction? Oh, one came up to my mind right now, and Rena, this connects with you. So one of our members made a donation to our daughter of a flat screen television set that her mom no longer needed, and our daughter Jennifer is setting up kind of like her first home. And so when we got the flat screen television over to Jennifer's townhouse, none of us, or she couldn't get it to work. The Wi-Fi wasn't working, and yet her Wi-Fi signal was working, and so forth. And in my family, I'm kind of nicknamed Lady MacGyver. I can tell a hammer from a screwdriver, but not much more than that. But I have always had a certain fix-it kind of mentality. And so Jennifer Googled everything trying to fix this television. We knew it worked, but we just couldn't get it to connect with the Wi-Fi. So I Googled videos on how to fix this problem. And I come across one that has you opening up the back panel of the television. I could just end there. And finding the cables that connect one little doodad in the back end of the television to the Wi-Fi box that recognizes the signal. And the YouTube video was showing that this LG TV had a flaw in the way it was manufactured, that there was no way to reset the Wi-Fi connector piece without opening up the back of the television and uncrimping this particular wire. I thought, I am not doing that. I know nothing about the back end of the television. And I tried for another couple of hours. And finally I said, you know what? I have nothing to lose. I've tried. I opened it up, didn't break it, found it, and sure enough, that piece was totally crimped, and I'm there uncrimping the thing and going, oh my God, I've now opened up a television set and seen the guts inside of this. Put it back together, made sure all the screws, every single screw, and they're all different sizes and they go in all different places, got it back together, and guess what? It worked. That was so satisfying. Incredibly satisfying, right? So you know what I mean about that feeling. Happiness isn't just this, excitement kind of thing. There's a certain enjoyment, right? But there's also this sense when we've really kind of tried something that is outside what we're familiar with, and we put forth the effort, and even if it didn't work, I would be able to say to myself, but I tried something that I had never tried before, and that in itself is rewarding. But then when something like that does work, we have that deep sense of satisfaction. One of the things he writes about satisfaction, though, is he says, satisfaction is a feeling that comes from accomplishing something that we worked for. It's something we feel when we've put in the work and maybe even suffered a tad, like, oh my God, am I going to break this thing or electrocute myself? It's not permanent, though. He says it's not permanent. Now I'm ringing. It's not permanent because we adapt to the next level. I don't know what else I'm going to be taking apart. I really hope I'm not taking anything else. The point is we adapt to the next level. We build on what we have already learned. And then he says the last of the components, which is really the most important, and this is probably nothing new to any of you in personal growth or on the spiritual path, and that is purpose. The sense of purpose. He says we can make do without enjoyment for a while, and even without satisfaction. Without purpose, however, we are utterly lost because we can't deal with life's inevitable puzzles and dilemmas. When we do have a sense of meaning and purpose, we can face life with hope and inner peace. Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. When we have a why to live for, we can bear almost anyhow. Our why may be our family, probably is. Our why can be our children. Our why can be our care about humanity. Our why can be our care about our planet. When we have a why, then we can deal with whatever it is that comes up. It doesn't mean that we might not be thrown off base for a bit or feel discouraged or feel depleted, but there's something stronger than feeling off base or feeling depleted. There is that inner sense that you're moving towards something that matters. He has a section where he talks about the importance of accepting bad feelings. Accepting bad feelings is a reality. We're going to ebb and flow with how we feel. Some days we are going to automatically feel happier, and other days we may just feel that we're languishing or that things are kind of dull or kind of flat. He says that the human brain reserves space specifically to process negative emotions. Think about that. Our brains reserve space specifically to process negative emotions. Negative and bad feelings can keep us safe and alert to danger. There's even research that suggests that we may be more likely to fix something or address something when we feel sad or angry, that sometimes those bad or unpleasant feelings are the driving forces for us to make a change. How many of you have ever heard of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving? It's been around for decades, right? Done amazing work. Where did that come from? Pain and then what? Anger, right? To make a change. So perhaps there is value in us not being so quick to be frustrated by or to try to get rid of what we might call those bad feelings. Maybe we need to look at what is it they're trying to point us to. He writes, here's the bottom line. Without unhappiness, you wouldn't survive, learn, or come up with good ideas. Even if you could get rid of your unhappiness, it would be a huge mistake. The secret to the best life is to accept your unhappiness so you can learn and grow and manage the feelings that result. It's a different frame, right? It's putting a bigger frame around our feelings. He also suggests something that we do a lot in metaphysics. We haven't always used this term. He uses the term metacognition. Metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. Your own thinking. Thinking about thinking. And that when we practice metacognition, when we practice thinking about our thinking, it helps us to step back from our emotional response and knee-jerk reactions to stimuli we don't like. When we think about our thinking, oh, I'm thinking this about that. Oh, I'm thinking this about that. When I can practice metacognition, thinking about what I'm thinking about right now, it gives me a little bit of distance from the feeling. And that little bit of distance can open up a space in our minds for a different choice, for a different behavior. He writes, this practice helps us recognize that our emotions are not facts, but signals indicating that something requires our attention. Imagine being able, when you have a strong, unpleasant feeling, to remind yourself in that moment that that emotion is not a fact. It's a signal that is telling me something requires my attention. That's a very different way of being with that feeling, I believe. A very different way. Signals rather than directives. That means I'm more empowered than to respond with greater wisdom and not an automatic knee-jerk reaction. By practicing metacognition, we can gain control over how we react to situations rather than being controlled by our immediate emotional response. Our feelings are not commands, they are suggestions. I've been listening to another book right now by a podcaster and author, Mel Robbins, called Let Them. I might do a series on it. It's a good book, Let Them. And in it, she writes a bit about the research on what are emotions exactly, what are our feelings exactly. And what she identifies through the research is that when we have this emotional reaction and feeling to something, that is a chemical response in the body and in the brain that triggers for only a few seconds. And if instead of resisting it, we just notice it and let it be, it will subside as long as we don't keep feeding it with our story. That last part's the hard part, isn't it? As long as we don't keep feeding it with our story. So let me kind of bring this to a suggestion and to a close. I think a way that we can put some of this into practice for ourselves is to kind of commit to memory those 3 pillars of happiness. Those 3 pillars being enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. And kind of noticing in yourself when you have a day in which you're feeling particularly happy or happier, when you're feeling content, to just kind of check in with yourself where you are, what's going on in your life in terms of what is it that you are enjoying, where are you feeling satisfied, how is purpose in play? And it's not that all 3 are going to always be there and always be equal or anything like that, but just kind of notice. And even more importantly than when you are feeling good, when you're not feeling good, when you're languishing, when you're feeling depressed or discouraged, to look at and ask yourself, which one of those buckets is really empty right now? And maybe it's all of them. But which one of those buckets is really empty? And then if you are one who has been struggling with feelings of depression, or you live with somebody who is struggling with depression, or you have a close family member or friend who's struggling, maybe just the phrase that happiness is not a destination, but is a direction, and that happy is not the goal, but happier could be the goal, maybe that is enough to be particularly helpful. Because when we look at happy as a place we're trying to get to, I think it will always feel like it's beyond us. But when we look at happier as a direction and experience, I think that that's actually attainable for all of us. Thinking about our thinking, looking at the pillars of enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose, and I think we can find ourselves in that way, building a better life for ourselves. And what I know to be true is when I am successful building a better life for myself, that helps everyone within my sphere of influence, that it is a possibility, it's a demonstration of inspiration and a demonstration of what's possible. And when I see you doing the same, you inspire me, because I know that if you can do it, I can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. Namaste.